Hi there, you are welcome to the part 2 of the how to detect an online user on your mobile application. And in case you haven't seen the part 1, do not worry. This part 2 is going to be more like a summarized and condensed version of the part 1. So if you haven't seen the part 1, that is okay. You can just continue with this one. And if you have seen the part 1, I know you might still have some questions. So this is just a follow up on the part 1 to make the entire process more easier and more streamlined, and also be able allow you to be able to fully integrate in the feature into your mobile application. We promise in this part to show a tutorial on how to build it as a plugin, but I just realized that it's going to be that is going to be a little bit challenging, and it's going to make this video longer. And some of you complained about the fact that the previous video was too long, so I'm going to try my best to keep this as short as possible. So we do not have the plans of including how to build this as a plugin. And what I think I will do is, since I still want to teach some of you how to build a Bubble plugin, maybe we will create a part 3 of this tutorials, which will specifically focus on how to build this as a plugin. So in the meantime, we are going to be fully focusing on how to build the online feature, and then be able to tell when a user is online or when a user is not online. Just like you can see in this sample design I have, where I see all the registered users, and then you can see the full name of my users, the email address of my users, and then the statuses of those users. But I am hiding the email addresses because these are some of the account actual users. So for the most important part of this tutorial, we are focusing on the online, and you can see that nobody is online because the feature is not built out yet. So yeah, if you are interested in really implementing this feature into your application, let's go into step by step to make sure that you fully understand the entire design on how to implement this feature, and we would go ahead and re-implement it all over again, just like we did in the part 1. The only difference here being we already learned that we would not be able to implement this feature on a free mobile application. So now we are using a paid mobile application to be able to implement and test this feature so that you can see that it is working. So let's go back to our Bubble page. The first thing I want to show you is my plan board here. So everything is going to revolve around the plan board. To try to condense the entire tutorial, to make it short, I have grouped this entire video into like 3 different segments. The first thing right now you can see is that you need a Bubble account and you need an Ably account. Also, I have Bubble+Ably, and you will be able to see who is online, just as indicated in the design here in the board. Now we will take it step by step. The first step we are going to be focusing on is going to be the Bubble side. But just to give you a full summary of what we are dealing with here, this shows you a stage by stage where you go from where to where, and then how they all interconnect, and then the Ably side as well, how it all interconnect, and all the various codes that we will need, such as the Ably SDK code, and then the Ably time code, and then the Ably access token code. So these are already codes that I already have here to make this tutorial faster. And in case you need access a copy of these codes, you can comment it or write in the comment section, or you can send me a message on Instagram at @the_Ishaq and request for these codes, and I will send you the code file. And you can also comment in the comment section and you will get the code files. So without wasting any much time, let's go into it. So it says that the first stage, we need a premium Bubble account. We already have a premium Bubble account, right? Now the next thing we are going to do is to build what we call the WebSocket reusable element. So this entire 3 stages is called, we are calling it WebSocket reusable element, and it means it's made up of like 3 things. The first thing here is the Ably time and access token API connector to generate token. So we are using hashtag token to know that this first step is needed to generate the token. So let's go back to our Bubble application quickly, and now you go under the plugins and you will find API connector. If you don't have API connector, if you don't have API connector, what you can do is to you can just go back to the plugins page on Bubble, and you would be able to add the API connector. So just like this, if you go to API add plugins and you search, you can see the API connector at the very top, and if you haven't installed it, this should say install, and you should be good to go. So in my case, I already have it, so I don't need to reinstall it. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add another API, and I'll call this one online users. I'll just call this one online users. In my case, you can call it whatever you really want to, but in my case, online users. There is no authentication required for this one, so it says none or self-handled. Now if we go back to our plan board, you see that we need two. One is the Ably time, and then the Ably access token. So let's go in and add an API call. By default, when you start a new API, it asks an API call for you. So let's go and change this API call and name it Ably time. Okay, and then let's add another API call and name it Ably access token. So I have the two API calls just as indicated in our documentation here. We need Ably time and Ably access token. Right now, how do we know what goes into the Ably time and Ably access token? So you can see there are two arrows here leading to somewhere. We have the first arrow and the second arrow. So let's zoom out a bit and find the Ably time. This is the first one we need. So this is the first arrow. It leads to the Ably time. And now we can zoom into the Ably time code. You will see that in the Ably time code, we have a basic JavaScript code here, but we would not use this in Bubble. We will translate this in Bubble. So the first thing I'm looking at right now is the method, and you can see that this method is get method, and this is the URL. So I'm going to copy this URL and go back to Bubble and make sure that the Ably times method is get. So we have get, post, put, patch, and delete. So you just paste it here and change this from data to action, because we are not displaying this in a repeating group or data group. We are displaying this as an action. We are using this as an action in a workflow step. So let me just quickly take the opportunity to explain the difference between data and action to you. So when you set up API call as a data, it means that you want to display that data in a repeating group, in a table, or in a group as a data reference, and that is referenced using the get data from external API. But when you set up an API call as an action, it means that you want to use that API call in a workflow step to be able to retrieve a data and be able to perform other tasks. So this is the difference between action and data. Now let's go back to things. Now we have our Ably time get, and then let's go back to our documentation and the response. Okay, we're just waiting the response, and that is all here. There is nothing here left. Now let's go back and initialize this call. So you see that in the by default it tells you that you need to reinitialize the call before it will start fetching data. So we need to click on initialize. So let's go to initialize call, and now you can see that it returns us with a value. So this is a timestamp of the time, the kind of time that Ably support. So some might think that you can also go ahead and use other ISO time generators on Bubble or plugins on Bubble to provide the time to Ably. It can work, but in most cases I find it not working. So just to stay on the safer side, follow me just as I have it here. Set up the Ably time and use that to generate your access token. So let's get back to it. Now that we have this, click on save, and now we are done with the first API call, which is the Ably time. Now we are going back to our documentation, and we will zoom out a bit and look for the second code, which is the Ably access token. So in the Ably access token, I see that I have my endpoint here and the method. So I'm looking for the method. Method is post. So I'm going to copy my API code and then go to the Bubble and now change this method to post and paste my code and change it from data to action. Remember, I told you that whenever we are using this as an action step inside the workflow, we need to reference it as an action or use as an action. So now that I have this, what is the next thing I need? We need to set up headers. So the header is authorization basic. Now we are going back to that and add a header and paste this and remove this remove this. You can make it private because user will not be supplying that from the front end. And then you add basic and leave and add a space after the basic, and then this is where your code will come. And you can see a comment says replace with your actual base 64 encoded API key. So you can see another key here says generate base 64. So this is the URL that we need to generate base 64. So it means that we have to go back into our Ably, we have to go and set up our Ably account and generate a base 64 API, base 64 code. So before I move forward, let's quickly discuss what this private or public is. So when you are setting up an API call on Bubble, anything that says private or public, optional or allow blank, you come across this things. When it says private or public, when it is private, it means that users on the front end would not be required to supply their own keys. But when it is public, it means that when you are setting up your API workflow steps, users from the front end would be required to supply their own API key or just API key. And when it is optional, it means that if there is no key provided or value provided, it can still go ahead and run. And when it is blank, it also means that it can be allowed as a blank to also run. But in some cases, when it is optional but not blank, it means that it's going to use the default key that you have in the backend setup of your API connector to perform the action. So keep that in mind as we go. Now the next thing that we want to do right now is we are going back to Ably. So this is my Ably account. I'm already signed up, and then you can see it means that to continue with this stage, we have to now go back to the Ably stage. So we are still on the step 1 on the WebSocket, right? So we have to go back to the Ably step, and then the first thing under the Ably step, it says we need a free or premium Ably account. Now I already have it. You can see I already have a free. How do I know that? It's here, it says free account, and then the next step is I need to create an Ably app with a presence enabled. So how do you create an Ably app? You go in here, you can see the button that says create a new app. You click on the create a new app, and then you give it a name that you want to. So I'll just call this one online users. So let's say online users, and you choose a programming language that you are familiar with. But since we are using Bubble, it doesn't really matter. But since we are using Bubble, I'll just go ahead and choose JavaScript and not JS. And then you can choose what you want to use this for. So example, I can say I'm using it for notifications, and then maybe just exploring. Then you can go to create app. After you click on the create app, the first thing you should do is after I click on the create app, the first thing you should do is to let me remove this. The first thing you should do is to go to the settings. You can see that you have been given an API key, but we don't need this one yet. The first thing we want to do is the settings, because in here it says with presence enabled. So we are going straight to our settings. So let's go back to Ably and go straight to our settings, and now look for the presence. Now this is under channel rules, and you can see I already have some channel rules here. You can maintain this and edit it, but I don't really like doing that. So what I'm doing is I'll create a new one, and I'll name it documentation. I have documentation here, so I name it user presence, because I'm going to be referencing that later. And then I will give it identity, and I will give it push notifications. So these are the only two I will check in for this one. So I now have identity and push notifications enabled. So after I am done with this, then I'll go back to and see what I need to do here, which says Ably webhook. So we are not here yet, so it means I'm done with this, and now I can go and service this demand, which is generate base 64 encoded, right? So we go back to our Ably, and you go into API keys, and you will copy the first API key that you have, which is the one that has a root row, which is this one. So I will click on copy, and now that is copied, I will just go in here and paste it. Then I will click on encode. So by default you should have UTF-8 and then LF Unix, and this is our base 64. Copy the new base 64, then we go back to Bubble and paste the newly created base 64. After this, what do we need to do? So for the headers, we are done. We need to add a content type in the header. So I'm going to copy the content type, and then I will add it here, and then application JSON here as well. It can also be private. Now for the body of my code, I can see the data I have. This is the data I have in the body, which is key name, TTL, capability, client ID, timestamp, nonce, right? So this is the data that I have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy. There are two ways I could do this. I could do this as a body JSON row, or I can just add it as parameters. So I want to do it as a parameter. So I'm just going to copy this one by one. So TTL, add it as a parameter, and then capability, add the capability also as a parameter, and then we need a client ID. We need to add that as well as a parameter, and then we need the timestamp, add it as a parameter, and we need the nonce and also add that as a parameter. Now the two things that we need here that should, or the three things that we need here that should not be private are the nonce, the timestamp, and the client ID, and the rest all can be private. Now let's go back to the key name. I'm just going to copy what I have here. So the key name has to be this letters. So the first part of your API key, the one that is not hidden, is your key name. So you come in and paste the key name here, and the TTL is basically how long the token that you generate should last. So you paste that one here, and then for the capability, I'm just going to copy that it should subscribe to push and presence. So that's how we created the user presence at the beginning. So we paste that one here, push and presence, and the client ID is the unique ID of your Bubble user. So why this is great is that it allows us to use the unique ID of the user on Bubble, because each user on Bubble has a unique ID. So the benefit we gain from that is that when a user logs in, we pass their unique ID to the Ably, and then when they log out, Ably will now send us back that unique ID, and we will be able to use that client ID, which is the unique ID of the user, to define which user is offline and instantly update their status as offline. So we are using that. We are using the client ID as the unique ID. We are using the unique ID as a client ID here. So it can be anything for a test, but I'll just go ahead and copy what I have here in the Figma. I'll just go ahead and copy what I have here in the Figma. And then for the nonce also, I'll go with that, and I'll just add some other numbers to make it stand different. Doesn't really matter. And now for the timestamp, I'm going to reinitialize this call. Then I'll copy this new timestamp. You have to always pass a new timestamp. And now we can go ahead and initialize the call. So let's see if this will work. Okay, so it says token request body incompatible with request URL. So we have a problem with our request URL. So let's go back to our request. Yeah. So this is the request token. I've not passed the request token. So sorry, we need to pass the request token. So let's look for the API key for the request token. So sorry. Oops. So it has to be request token. So what we miss is that before the request token, you have to pass the name, the key name in the URL also. So we need to copy this key name and add it here in the URL as the extension of which we want to request a token. So let's try again and see if we are able to get our access token now. So request, and now it says you are the timestamp. You see, this is why I say the timestamp is important. Now you can see the timestamp is empty. Let's try and generate a new timestamp. Anytime we are generating access token, we need to pass a new timestamp. So let's try again, and there you go. So now we have our access token, the key name, the issue date, when it will expire, the capability, and the client ID. And now we can save that. So we are going back to our plan board or documentation. Now that we are able to generate access token and Ably timecode, we are going back to the bubble steps, and then we are done with step 1 because we have our access token. Now we are going back, we are going to step 2, which is going to be a backend workflow to use the token to generate key for the front end. So let's go back to Bubble. Now on Bubble, it means that we have to go in and add a backend endpoint. So we go to the backend workflows and add a new workflow. Now we will give this API call generate token. So no, generate key. So generate underscore key. So we know that this is going to be used to generate key. We are not going to this way, and then I'll go to auto detect and click on let's go there and click on detect data. The reason why I click on detect data is because I want to copy this URL. So now that I've copied this URL, this is the endpoint of my backend webhook that I'm going to be using from the front end to generate the key for my users. A key, what I'm calling a key, is this data that was returned from the access token, which contains the access token, the client ID, the expiring time, and etc. And in general, I call it the key or the Ably key. So I'm using this endpoint. Let me give it a purple color so that I will remember this is the endpoint I'm using. And now the key, the URL that I copied, I need to save it somewhere. So let's go back into I don't want to spoil this documentation, so I will maintain this. Let's go and create a node. So let's say online node editor. Let's find an online node editor, and now save the key we copied. So oops, yeah, so now we save our key. So let's call it key endpoint, right? The key endpoint, and then save it here. So we will come back to this one later. Now we go back to the bubble and change this back to manual. Okay, we change it to manual, and then we create a key called client ID. So we create a key called client ID. How did I know the client ID? Let's go back to our documentation. Our documentation says we should generate a key. And now the reason why I know that I need to pass a client ID is because remember when we were creating this workflow, I said that we need to pass a client ID, which has to be the user that is trying to connect. So we create a key called client ID, but in that key that we created, this value client ID, it has to match what we have in our documentation, which is the Ably SDK. And the reason why I know we will need the Ably SDK here is because the third step here, it says that we will use the Ably SDK using the key, and the key, remember, the key is here on the step 2. So in the Ably SDK, if you want to quickly take a look at it, you will see that we are looking for anything that says client, and then let's see, where do we have client? So this is token endpoint, fetch connections, and there you go. This is the spelling of the client ID. So I need to copy this spelling of the client ID and make sure it matches with what I have in the backend here, which it does. Now when I get this client ID, the first thing I need to do, or the first step I'm going to do here, is to search for online users and use the Ably time so that I will get a newly generated time, and then I will search for online again and get the Ably access token. Then for the time, I will use result of step 1, which gives me the time, and then the nonce I will use a client ID, and then the client ID itself I will also use a client ID. This doesn't really matter, so I can just make it x111, just make it unique. It doesn't really matter, so I'm leaving it as client ID. Now when we do this, it will generate a token for the user, but we need to return. So we need to search for return data so that this backend data can return the data to the front end, but we have to structure it as an application JSON as well. So we go to other content and we name it application JSON. So now one important thing we need to understand here is that we have to manually format the data that we are returning to the front end. But how do we know which data to format or how to format it? How we can know how to format this data is by going back to our API connectors access token response and copy that response and then come and paste it here and use that as a point of reference. So let's go back to our API connector and then go to modify. So you find the Ably access token, you go to manually modify and then you control A. So you copy everything here, I use control C to copy. Then you go back to your workflows in the backend and paste that data here. Now that you've pasted the data, you need to change the default data here into a dynamic value. So you see I've selected what is there and click on insert dynamic data, and then for the key name as well, I have done the same thing. So I'm coming, let me confirm one thing with the documentation here, with the Ably documentation. So this I'm just making it more simple, because if you are to go into the Ably documentation, it's really a little bit stressful. So just for you to know. So all right, so we have this, and then issued, and the issued as well should be dynamic. The expires should be dynamic, and then the capability, you can really remain like this, but I'm going to clean it up because I'm seeing some, I think, let me do this, let me do something, let me generate time again so that I don't have to clean that up. I'm just trying to be lazy on this. I should have just cleaned it up, but let's see. So we generated a new data. Yeah, it's the same thing, so I need to clean it up. Okay, let's go and clean it up now. Client ID, let me just do the client ID first, and then let's clean this up. So to clean this up, if I am to reference from this, I have this, and I need to remove the /, and then we have presence, publish, subscribe. So I needed to remove those extra characters, and there you go. I believe this should work. Okay, so this is the data we have. Now we have to fill in the actual data. So token is coming from step 2, key name is coming from step 2, issued is coming from step 2, expires is also coming from step 2, capability, I could have taken it from the step 2, but I don't want to do that, so I'll just go to the capability is not going to change. If like the capability, we have different capabilities you're working with, then I would have reference from step 2, but it's not changing, so I'm going directly with this because I also don't want the extra special character to show. So now that we are done with our backend here, so let's go back to step 2. We are done with our backend, which is supposed to provide us with the key. Excuse me. So now it means we have to now work on the Ably SDK. So we have to work on the Ably SDK using the step, just using the step 2. But before we'll be able to do this, because it's the last step, and this one, the SDK, it uses an HTML element, it means that we have to now go in and create our reusable WebSocket element on Bubble, so that we can add our HTML elements there and our JS to Bubble element there, so that we can now create the entire element, which is a WebSocket reusable. And how I know we need this two things is that you can see here there are two arrows here. One says that online is triggered using the JS to Bubble element interface, which is a toolbox plugin element, and then the workflow to update active users to online is where we trigger it. So now that you can see these two work together in tandem, so it means that I need to go in and create my reusable element. So now back to Bubble. back to Bubble to create my reusable element. I'll just go in here and find add new reusable element. I will call it WebSocket. So we have it called WebSocket, and now it will give you this element. If it doesn't have to be responsive really because it's not important, but I'll just keep it responsive to be more consistent with my UIs. So now that it is responsive for me, I'll just leave it as it is right now, and I'll go and add two elements. One is the HTML element, and I will call it Ably SDK, and then I'll leave it like this, and I'll go and find JavaScript to Bubble. So you have this element called JavaScript to Bubble, which is coming from Toolbox. So in case you don't have this, you go to Toolbox. So you go to add plugins and you search for this plugin, which is a Toolbox, and you can use this JavaScript to Bubble element in the front end. So I have this two JavaScript to Bubble, and I'll call this JavaScript to Bubble online. So you give it a name of online, and the suffix name too is online, and the value is text. So you make it trigger event, publish event, and then the value type, you give it text value type. How did I know which name to give it as online? Let's go back to our HTML documentation, sorry, the SDK documentation here, and you will find that at the very bottom of this documentation, there is a part where we have bubble fn. So we're looking for bubble fn. So this is disconnected. We're looking for the connected, which you see bubble underscore fn online. Yes, so this is it. So it means that it has to have the name of online. So now that I'm done with this, I'm going back to my HTML app and give it a okay, it doesn't really matter here, so I'm gonna give it 100% width and 100% height, right? And make it fixed. Then I need to paste my code here. Now how do I paste this code? I go back here and I will just go back into my documentation and copy the entire SDK code, and now I will paste the entire SDK code here. Now that I have my entire SDK code, there are a couple of things that I need to change. The first thing I need to change is basically, hold on, let me change my layout here to alignment. So the first thing I'm going to change here is basically going to be the endpoint I copied. Remember, we copied an endpoint here in our note, so I need to copy this endpoint back. So I'll just come in here, copy this endpoint, go back to Bubble. Then in Bubble, I'll look for where it says endpoint. So here you have construct endpoint, and then we have this HTTPS. So I'll copy this endpoint, and then I'll need to pay attention to the version. Now I'm pasting this endpoint here. I have pasted the endpoint here, and the version here says version test. But because I don't want you to manually come later to change whether version test or version live, I have built a function at the top which determines if it is test version you are interacting with or if it is live version you are interacting with. So it will automatically handle that without you needing to go and change the code with the version live or version test. So it is going to be handled by the code. So now that I have provided this code, I need to remove the initialize at the end because I already know what data I'm sending. So I don't need to reinitialize it because it would not work if I do that. The next thing we need to change here is going to be the client ID, remember. So we need to look for the client ID, which is here, and the client ID has to be the current user's unique ID. So you select that current user unique ID and make it dynamic and use current user's unique ID as so. So you have current users unique ID, and that is all. You are done with this SDK. Now that we are done with the SDK, or now that we are done with the let's go back to our documentation. Now that we are done with the Ably SDK to subscribe the user, the next thing we need to do is to do the last step, which is this one, which is a workflow to update the user to online. So we are going back to our workflow. I want to change this one to also 100%. No, so let's make this one 1 by 1 since I can't make it 100%. Now I'm going to look for the way to make users online, and how to do that is to go to the elements here, you go to the workflow, you click on add a workflow element, and you find the JavaScript to Bubble and look for the online element here and give it a condition that this only when this value is yes. So only when we have a value received as yes should this one run, or when the value is not empty. And what we want to do with it is you want to make changes to the current user. So you go to account and you find make changes to current user, and we are looking for the field that I created called online. So you need to have a field in your data in your user data type that is yes or no, and we change this one to online is yes. And that is it. We are done with our WebSocket. So we are done with this step, which is a WebSocket. The next and last step we need under the bubble is going to be an endpoint unsubscribe users, which is going to be the disconnect users. Now, what this does, you can see it links you back to the second step of the Ably. So remember, we have done step 1 and step 2 of Ably already. Now we are going to the second step of Ably. So let's go to the bubble and create that endpoint. Now on the bubble side, we go to the backend again. So you go to your backend workflows and you create a new endpoint and you give it a call disconnect user. So disconnect underscore user, and then you give it automatic detection. I think that should work. So you go with automatic detection, or that you can copy your endpoint, right? So we have this automatic detection and you copy in the endpoint, and then with the code you copy, go back to your Ably and find integrations. So in the Ably side, you look for integrations and then you go to add a new integration. So you have the incoming webhooks and integration. Because we want Ably to send data outside, we have to go with the integration rule, and you choose the webhook and choose webhook again, and you paste the URL that you copied, but in this case leave the initialize so that we can detect the kind of data that Ably is going to be sending us when the user disconnects, so that we can use that to configure how to update the user. So now that I have this, I don't need to pass any headers to bubble, and then the source I make it presence. So you can make it yeah, it's supposed to be presence, and then you need to add no filter here, but you need to make this one JSON, because that is what bubble expects. So now that I have this, I need to find a way to pass that data to our backend workbook so that we can learn how to disconnect users. So how am I going to do that? What I'm going to do is I'm going back to my test page, which I have here, test users. The ideal way to handle this webhook element with this webhook, so I'm going to copy and add a webhook element, which is here. So I have webhook element, and you can actually give it 0 by 0 so that it doesn't disturb your UI. The ideal way to handle this is to add it inside the general header of your application. So if you have it in the header and your header is a reusable element, it means that across any page the user is interacting with, you can keep track of whether they're online or not. But if you are adding it in a page, it's going to give you a whole lot of problems, because it means that anytime a page loads, it's going to resubscribe. But then if you add it in a header, it's going to load only once, and that is the best way to go with it. So now that I have this, I'm confident that when I load now, I should be able to subscribe a user. And how do we know that? We can monitor it here in the stats. Now in the start, if I go to my Ably apps stats, I can see that I don't have any user online. So everything here is flat. Let's go in and test our application. So we need to run us. So we need to go to a user and run as a user. So let's go and look for a simple user to try with. So let's say we want to test with this user. Now we are loading our page. Okay, so we've loaded our page. Then let's remove our debug mode. We've removed the debug mode. So right now we are logged in as that user. So let's see if, let's first of all take a look at our inspect console log to see if there is any error coming from anywhere. Okay, so you can see it says fail to fetch new token, syntax error, bad control character in string linear in JSON on position. So we have a code error in the SDK. So this is a very easy one to fix. We are going back to the webhook and looking for the SDK. It says that we have written something wrong somewhere. So let's look for that something that we've written that is wrong, and then we fix it. So let's look for it. So this basically this sometimes happens when when you have a character issue, and remember where we have our code right now is not a dedicated code editor, so this is bound to happen. So what I can do quickly is I'm going to copy the same code that I have here in the Visual Studio, and then repaste the code, so that this way we are sure that we have the exact code that we supposed to be working with. So we are going to copy the code and then paste it to be sure we have the right code that we want to work with. Okay, so copied. Now I need to clear everything here, so paste. Then I need to go back to my notes, so this is why I didn't delete the notes. So I'll go back to my notes, and then I'll copy this code, go back to Bubble, and then I'll paste it here. I want to make sure that I'm not passing any error to the code, and then copy the remaining part of my code after the slash. And remember, I said we should not include the initialize, so we go back here and paste the remaining code. So we have our remaining code, and let's remove the API part. Okay, so this is good, and now this looks good, and now we have to update our client ID again. So this is a client ID, and then let's make it current users unique ID. So let's try again and see what will happen. Okay, so we go back to our Bubble application and refresh the page and see what will happen. Okay, so we just refresh the page, and now let's check our inspector to see if we are experiencing the same issue. Okay, so it still says failed to fetch new token, error, syntax error, bad control character in string linear in JSON at position 342 line. So I think there is one way to really tell, which is to put in this code in an actual code editor to really detect where the issue is actually coming from. So let's do that quickly before we move forward. So let's see, I'm in a code editor now, so I'm gonna save this one as HTML. So it's an HTML code, by the way. Okay, so we have our code in an HTML code, which is good. I think this looks good. Then let's also pass another data from the backend to make sure that is not causing the issue also. Let's pass this data. So basically what we are trying to do is we are trying to fix a syntax error that we are currently experiencing in the code or in the code base. And I'm suspecting the issue could be coming from the backend, because I just checked this code from the front end, and everything really looks okay. So let's go back to the backend. Oh, sorry, we need to allow this to run without any authentication, by the way. So let's make this purple as well to keep track of things. Disconnect user. So this one. So I'm suspecting this. Therefore, I'm just going to copy and paste this somewhere. Clear everything and paste the new code that I have. And my suspicion is basically on this part, the capability part. So I'm just going to copy the capability part and replace it with the new one that I copied, which is more properly formatted. All right, let's try again, and fingers crossed, and let's hope this works as expected. All right, so now we are back to our bubble page, and we are going to refresh the page, and hopefully this doesn't return as the same error. Yes, here you go. You can see we've gotten the token and everything. So the issue was from the backend. The issue was from the backend where we were generating. I knew that formatting was wrong. I knew something was going to come up because this is very sensitive. So now that we are able to assign the user and we have a user that is online, let's go ahead and set our bubble disconnect into a detect data so that it can start listening to data. And let's refresh this. And you can see immediately I set it on the detect data, because we already have a user online, it disconnected the user when I click on the refresh, and this is the data that we have gotten. And you can see that in our data we have the status here. So this is the application, and then the presence is the and the ID. This is the client ID, so this is the ID of the user, and the status is online. So we have three different kind of actions. So we have three kind of actions, and how you can know which action you are dealing with is just let's go to Google and search for Ably Ably user presence 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 status action numbers type. So you can Google something like this. Ably, let me look for their documentation, because I said I don't want to make this video really long, so I think I'm going to keep it short. Okay. So this is our endpoint, and then this is the payload that Ably is sending. So they have 0, looking at the documentation here, they have 0, and then they have 3. 3 is for when the user is online, and 0 also, it could be when the user is online or maybe away. So these are the ones I don't want to deal with, but then 1, 2, or 1 and 2, they are all disconnected on or an error. So let me try a faster way. Maybe let me try and see if ChatGPT can give me a faster response, and see so that we can take it from there. So what are the 0, 1, 2, 3 means on quickly? Let's just see. So you can see 0 is absent, 1 is present, 3 is update, no, 2 is update, 3 is leave. So these are the things. So right now it means that the present is only 1 that is present, and 2 that is update. So it means that 0 and 3 you want to terminate. 1 is 0 or 3. So let's go ahead and build that workflow. So now in the backend here, what we want to do is that we want to do a terminate workflow. So we're going to do a terminate workflow, and we will terminate the workflow when the presence first items action is, so 1 or 2 we terminate is 1, or the request data's presence first items action is 2. So if it is 1 or 2, we want to terminate. We don't want to do anything about it if it is 1 or 2. And then that means that you can actually update the user from online to offline also from this same workflow. And the benefit side of this is that instead of using the JavaScript web on the front end to update when a user is online, you can actually use the same endpoint to update when a user is online, or when a user is absent, or when a user is offline. You see, so this is another benefit or another side of this webhook, which you can really utilize. And if you want to go with my approach, you can just handle the online from the front end, so that you can be sure that this user is online and there is no mistake about that, which I don't think it will really happen. So now if the user is online, we don't want to do anything, but then when the user is not online, you want to make changes to things. So which is do a search for, so we do a search for user, right? And this is where the client ID comes in handy. So you go to unique ID and use the request data's we find the presence, and we find the first item, and we take the client ID. The client ID will match exactly the same as the unique ID of that user. Then we find the online and change it to no. So it means that this user is not online. Now let's go back to our test page and do some designs. On our test page, in the last column, you can see that we have a text here that says online yes or offline no, and I think I already have it set up. So we are going back to our application and refresh the page. Now that we already have the online and offline set, and we refresh the page, and I'm going to open, so you can see that this user is online. So I'm going to open this same application in a different computer, in a different browser, and then try to log into another user, and then we want to see that in real time it is updating when the user is online and when the user is offline. And when you go to your Ably account as well, you will be able to see the statistics here of the number of users online and number of activities. So now I want you to pay attention to this part, because I'm going to be logging into another user for us to see how this feature is going to play out in real time. Because the most important thing right now is you want to know in real time immediately a user is not online anymore, or when a user is currently online. So let's quickly log into my Bubble account and then try to see if the user will be able to update in real time or not. So yep, so whilst I'm doing that, let me quickly say this to you also. So in case I just want to be doing this, in case you find Bubble to be very difficult, please know that you are not alone. Each and every one of us have been there. I remember when I started building applications on Bubble, the first attempt I made, I did run away. It took me almost like 6 months before I opened Bubble application again, and I regretted doing that. I regretted not persevering to continue learning it. So at the first attempt, you may feel scared that there is so much to learn on Bubble. Trust me, there is not much to learn on Bubble. You hear people saying that the learning curve on Bubble is too steeper. Don't think like that. What I want you to have at the back of your mind from now on is that Bubble is easy to learn. Bubble is not difficult, and then all you need to know is to learn the basic foundation of Bubble and the basic frameworks of Bubble, and you don't have to know everything of it. Even ourselves, we are making these tutorials and teaching people about how to do these Bubble things, sometimes we have to go, so whilst I'm doing this, I'm also doing this, I'm kind of trying to multitask. Sometimes we have to go to ChatGPT, sometimes we have to go to the Bubble forum, sometimes we have to keep Googling for a whole day trying to find how to solve a single problem. So there is nothing like you are a master of Bubble, A to Z. No, it's not difficult. And if we believe we actually know a little bit to be able to teach others on this platform, and we say that we are also still learning on how to master Bubble, this should let you know that you can also do it. It's absolutely possible. If somebody can do it, why can't you do it? So I will definitely be making a series of videos that will break down Bubble for a full beginner from scratch. If you're interested in something like that, please leave me a comment so that I will know what to focus my next videos on. And the style I'm going to go with on those videos is that I'm going to look at breaking Bubble into fragments and then grouping them into not more than 3 or 4 groups. I'll look at the interface, the design interface, I'll look at the API interface, and I'll look at the workflow interface, and I'll look at the backend interface, and I'll look at the database interface. So I'm thinking of out of the head right now, I'm thinking of grouping the entire Bubble thing into let's say 5 groups. Then we will take each group one at a time. So one group at a time. When we're dealing with design, I make sure that I give you detailed, easy to understand, step-by-step guide on the design interface, to make sure that by the time you complete that course on the design interface, you should be able to build any kind of interface on Bubble. When we are talking about the API connector, even if you don't have any knowledge of building API connections, I would give you a step-by-step guide on all that it involves our API connector, and we will integrate a real-world applications that you can use to test your hand on. And by the time we should be done with that, you really should be able to touch any API integration a Bubble application requires. And the same thing when we go to backend workflow, when we go to the front end workflows or backend workflows and then front end workflow, yeah, and then the database, data security, and all those things, I will make it a step-by-step beginner friendly guides and a very well documented guide that I'm very sure by the time you exhaust these 5 groups of courses, you should be ready to enter the world of Bubble and start building real world applications. So that is just by the way. And if you're interested in something like this, do leave me a comment so that I will know where to channel my energy on. Now it looks like my application has fully loaded. I'm going to now go in and log in as another user, and I want you to pay attention to this page. These are all the users we have. I'm going to look for maybe this user or that user and then log in on as that user and see if, hold on, let me refresh this. So I think it will disconnect me, but let me refresh this. It's because I opened another editor. That is why it's doing that. But let's go back to Bubble. Okay, now that we are back to Bubble, and you can now see that we have one user logged in. Now we are going to open another user, and we are interested in is we want to see that user update in real time as well. So let's go into runners and let's see what would happen. Okay, so our page is still loading. Sorry about that. Okay, so we just loaded as another user, but we need to remove okay, so we loaded as another user, and then this user is online, but I think there is some sort of privacy rule somewhere that I need to get rid of because it is making it not possible for me to work with this. So I'm removing a privacy rule. Okay, so I need to refresh these pages before I'll be able to really see what is happening. So hold on whilst I do that. Okay, so I just refreshed that page, and now you can see that we have 2 users online. We have 2 users online in real time. And what will happen when I close this user? So I just closed that. Okay, it's still loading. Okay, so I just closed this user, and we should see this update. But then sometimes this data is a front end something. Let's go back to the Bubble side for you to see. If I go to the Bubble side, this is the user that I closed out, which is the first user, and then the online. So let's look for the online. Oh, it says yes. Do you know why it says yes? This is a very good one. That it says yes. The reason why it says yes, remember back in the Ably, when we were setting up the integration, we did not remove the initialized. We said we needed the initialized, but now we don't need it. So we need to remove this initialized, else it wouldn't work. So now that I have removed the initialized, let's go back to our Bubble and refresh these 2 pages and open the other user once again, so that we will see it online. So you can see right now we have 2 users online because it wasn't able to update. So let's now open it again and close that user so that to be able to update our backend that the user is not online anymore. So I'm loading that. Once it's loaded, immediately I close it. I will say that I have closed it so that we'll see how fast it will update the database on the Bubble side. It should be a matter of milliseconds or a second to be able to update it. So it's still loading. Yep, on my other PC I have a very poor internet connection. So I believe this is already loaded. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to close the browser. So you can see immediately I closed the browser, it updated this last user into offline. So this is how really fast and efficient this webhook is. Now this is it. I believe we have fully exhausted this documentation. We have been able to build a bubble site, the Ably site. We have been able to put in all the codes, and test was successful. Now let's talk about why this is important. So the reason why this is important is that, most developers on Bubble, like I said in the part one, they use Bubble workflows, which runs every 5 seconds to see if a user is online, and a couple of backend workflow that they call heartbeat and etc. Like, too complicated, and at the end of the day, it's going to consume your workload unit. Just to keep track of which user is online, it could make you spend a lot more money on Bubble. And the benefit this gives you is that whenever somebody load, it just run once and send a signal to Ably, and then Ably send a signal to us that this user is online, and they want to disconnect, it run once and update that everything is not online. And this happens because of the SDK that is connected between the front end and the Ably side. So this is the most efficient way possible that I can think of, that you can keep track of users online. So if this video you find it helpful and you are really interested in seeing that plugin implementation, you can also leave it in the comment section, and I will make a video about how to implement this as a plugin. And why this is important is that even though I could actually build a plugin and put it in the plugin marketplace, I think there are some people who want to learn how to also build Bubble plugins. So I can take advantage of the opportunity while teaching you how to build a plugin, to build this plugin with you and then put it in the marketplace, so that you can just use that plugin and use it in your Bubble application. But I really doubt this is even possible because of the backend something. I really doubt this is possible. But I want to give it a try. I want to attempt to try that. So if it is possible and your comments are asking for it, I'll make a video for it and I'll let you know if it is possible. If it is not possible, we'll find a way around that. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial and following up from the beginning to the end of the tutorial with me. Once again, if you are enjoying how we do it here at No Code and Beyond, do like, comment, and then share this video. You might not know who may need something like this. Thank you.